Let's go ahead and get started. Others might jump on. And again, if I fuss with my camera, it's a little bit because it's not my same normal setup here in this lovely little hotel room. So if there's something you wanted to know that you jumped on to know about today, just write a quick comment. For those of you who might listen to this back, know that you can email me anytime with your questions or ideas. But I thought I'd start off with a quick poll, and it might be kind of putting a couple of you on the spot since there's only a few of us live. But on the average, and some of you teach, so you might know the answer to this, but if you're a student in the United States in this day and age, in your career from pre-K to 12th grade, how many standardized tests will you sit for in the career from pre-K to 12th grade? So if you've got a guess, and again, if you're listening to this after the fact, how many do you think? My friends in Michigan thought maybe 3, maybe 5. And I said 3 a day, 3 a year, 3 out their career. So their guess was kind of low. That's your hint. So how many, on the average, how many standardized tests do you think a student pre-K to 12th grade would take? So think about that for a second. Next question is, given how many ever you think that they might be taking, how many hours do you think a year is spent? And this is not prepping for the test. This is just taking the test. This does not include teacher tests that may be created to do more formative and useful assessment. It doesn't include diagnostic tests or kids going through response to intervention or screening tests or any other kind of test, just statewide standardized tests. So we got a guess of 35 throughout their career. Yeah, it's 112. So that's like a lot, right? And so if people need the link to the report, I'll get that to you. But it's 112 on the average. That's 8 a year. And what's really interesting or crazy is that if you are a student with a disability or you're younger, that number goes up. Most kids that get into the system for having a disability under the age of 5 get into the system by being subjected to having a standardized test administered to them. If you're in a race to nowhere state, you might be engaged in various kindergarten readiness tests that are standardized. You might even be engaged in what are called formative assessments for preschool, but they're also standardized. So the younger you are, that number might actually go up by the time you graduate in the United States. So it's an average of 8 standardized tests a year. And for those of you who know me, know that I am not a big fan of standardized tests, and with good reason. So then that translates to about 20 to 25 hours a year just spent taking the tests. Again, that's not time prepping for tests, taking other tests that teachers might find useful, and or engaged in other diagnostic testing. So that's a huge chunk. Over 2% of the year is spent just sitting down and taking a test, even if you're just going to eat the Scantron sheet. So what we did was we created this infographic. And again, if you don't have it, email me, I'll get it to you, or go to prekteachandplay.com/3, that's the number 3, RD-grade-infographic, and you can request access. But what we did is we did a quick search of research, facts and figures around biological factors that impact learning to read, home and school factors, and then school and societal factors, political. So you've got like all those layers. So if you knew like Bronfenbrenner's work, you can see that applied to this infographic. And so if you're just joining us and knowing that buffering's a little bit of a problem, I'll share the link to the recording as well. But there are lots of mediating factors that impact a kid being able to read. Biological, things that are happening inside our bodies, things that happen in our homes, things that happen in our communities, things that happen at school, and things that happen politically. And so for those of us who are teachers, we're only one small component, even though we spend a lot of time thinking about and worrying about and fussing about testing and getting kids ready and teaching them to read. We're really only one small factor, and there's a lot of other barriers as well as supports. So the infographic was designed to show you all of these mediating factors, all the things that were barriers as well as supports, so that as we really got to thinking about how to support children and ensure that they pass the third grade test or whichever test we're so worried about, that we're really considering all of these factors. I'll give you one example. Our broadcasts aren't very long, and I know some of you are having a little bit of trouble with the streaming. So again, if you go to preKteachandplay.com/third, that's the number 3, RD-grade-infographic, you can request it and look at it. But for example, one of the barriers that's a biological barrier, I'll just read this fact to you, but learning to read can be difficult when the response of a child's brain to sound is compromised. So logically, we would think of a child who might be deaf or hard of hearing. But what's really interesting is this notion of the sound being compromised in some way. And that could be a student with an auditory processing disorder. That could be a child with reoccurring ear infections. That could be quite literally a kid with too much wax in their middle ear. And so just these very normal everyday things can compound and really have a negative impact on kids learning to read. And so if you think about auditory processing disorders, or you think about kids that may have some sort of hearing loss, we put these facts and figures into the infographic to show people this is not a small number of kids. For example, 2 to 7% of children in the U.S. have an auditory processing disorder. So there's a chunk right there of kids who may or may not be identified as having a disability, but really might have an auditory processing disorder that's really impacting their ability to hear and process sound, which will of course impact their learning to read. And also 2 in 100 children under the age of 18 have some sort of hearing loss. So that's a significant number of kids that we're likely to come across. And so the infographic is designed to say, look guys, school is only one factor. Is it an important factor? Certainly. But there are many, many, many other factors, including chronic stress, trauma, that sort of thing. So speaking of trauma, let's look at that one in the infographic too. It's really compelling in the sense of the impact that chronic stress and trauma can have. And again, I know some of you teach kids who you know very much are exposed to chronic stress and trauma. And so here's the barrier. Learning to read is harder for children who are experiencing chronic stress and trauma. No surprise. But it's also harder for kids to learn to read if they don't have models in their life of people who demonstrate impulse control. So you can just go out to dinner, go to Walmart. I go to the airport a lot, and I can often see that there aren't a lot of strong models for kids around impulse control. And when they don't have these strong models, it'll impact their learning to read, which will of course impact their success in school and in life. And so statistically, 2/3 of children age 16 or younger, which many of us that would be listening to this or on the call today serve, have experienced traumatic events. And that number continues to rise. And then children who have experienced trauma and chronic stress are 3 times more likely to have behavior challenges, to have a behavior disorder, to be retained, to be expelled, all of these things which then impact a child's ability to learn to read and then to be successful in school and in life. So quickly, your call to action, other than the most obvious, which is to download the infographic and share it widely, is to 3 other things I thought of. So first, I think we've got the standardized norm reference testing sort of covered, standardized for sure. If we're taking 112 of them across our lifespan, how about we spend some of our time engaged in more authentic assessment? The other is to really, as we use this infographic, really attend to those mediating factors. So there's these barriers, but then what's the flip side? What are the supports that will allow a child to become a better reader, to thrive in school and in life? And then third, to always teach the whole child, that we can't just pull out rhyming, picture naming, and alliteration, or we can't pull out just math or pull out just science and expect children to thrive. We really need to address the whole child. So your 3 calls to action are to, whenever possible, push for and advocate and engage in authentic assessment. 2, is to use the infographic to really understand all of these mediating factors, the barriers and the supports. And then 3, in our efforts to make sure that we're teaching the whole child and that we're not just looking at isolated skills and then wanting to know how they're doing on a particular test that may or may not be valid, may or may not be useful, may or may not have any evidence base for the students for which we're using it. So that is our short and sweet broadcast for today. I appreciate those who have joined me and who have tried to join me. Sorry that the buffering was a bit of an issue. But again, you can access the infographic at prekteachandplay.com/3 RD for third -grade -infographic. And you can always email me at christy.b2k@gmail.com and I can shoot it right out to you as well. So thank you for all that you do on behalf of young children and their families. And you can give some hearts if you found the infographic to be useful. If you have some ideas about how you might use the infographic in your work, feel free to share that comment so that people who listen to this later can benefit from